Howdy, folks. Radical Russ, your red state refugee here, and I got to take a moment to rant on some of these latest abortion laws in this country. In Alabama, they have this law that allows the state to prosecute people who try to help women either get abortion pills or travel out of state for abortion access. In a lawsuit challenging the law, the Yellowhammer Fund argues that Alabama can no more regulate out-of-state abortions than another state can deem its laws legalizing abortions apply to Alabama. In response, the Attorney General says, quote, "The conspiracy is what is being punished, even if the final conduct never occurs. That conduct is Alabama-based and within Alabama's power to prohibit." My birth state of Idaho has a similar law known as the abortion trafficking law. In the case of this law, they call the crime abortion trafficking, and it's punishable by a minimum of 2 years in prison. It forbids helping a person under the age of 18 obtain abortion pills or leave the state for abortion care without parental permission. In response to the law, a lawsuit has argued that this ban infringes on the right to interstate travel and on the First Amendment right to speak about abortion and, again, engage in expressive conduct, including providing monies and transportation and other support for pregnant minors traveling within and outside Idaho, end quote. The lawsuit also says the travel ban lacks clarity and invites arbitrary enforcement, raising the specter of traffic stops of girls of reproductive age, and infringes on the right of people to cross the border into neighboring states, including Washington, where minors can legally obtain abortion care without parental consent. So remember when the conservatives were gearing up to overturn Roe versus Wade, and they kept saying, we need to return this issue to the states. Let the states decide. Well, the states have decided, Alabama and Idaho have decided to treat pregnant women like birthing slaves, and other states have decided to allow women to be free citizens with full and total sovereignty over their bodies. If one of the citizens of the United States leaves one of these handmaid states and crosses over into a free state for abortion care, that too is states' rights. But again, leaving the issue to the states was never their priority. Their priority is to subjugate women, to return them to a second-class status, and to treat them as broodmares for the state. We see this in the fact that as soon as the Dobbs decision was handed down, and no sooner than a bunch of states had implemented their draconian anti-abortion laws, that then they started calling for a federal ban on abortion at 15 weeks. Leave it up to the states, but then no, let's turn it over to the federal government. There was another time in our nation's history when some of the states wanted to treat some of our people like slaves and forbid them from going to other states and try to reach into other states and prosecute crimes that are crimes in their state but not in the other state. And that case was called Dred Scott v. Sanford. If you don't know the history, Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri. From 1833 to 1843, he resided in Illinois, which was a free state at the time, and the Louisiana Territory, where slavery was forbidden by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. After returning to Missouri, Scott filed suit in Missouri court for his freedom, claiming that his residence in a free territory made him a free man. After he lost the suit in Missouri, he brought a new suit in federal court. Now, Dred Scott's master, or the person who enslaved Dred Scott, maintained that no, quote, Negro or descendant of slaves could be a citizen in the sense of Article 3 of the Constitution. The question to be decided then was whether or not Dred Scott was free or was he a slave. In a 7-2 decision, it is widely considered one of the worst, most unjust decisions our Supreme Court ever handed down. The 7-2 majority held that, quote, a Negro whose ancestors were imported into the United States and sold as slaves, end quote, whether enslaved or free, could not be an American citizen and therefore did not have the standing to sue in federal court. The Chief Justice dismissed the case on procedural grounds. Chief Justice Taney further held that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was unconstitutional and foreclosed Congress from freeing slaves within the federal territories. That opinion matched what the Missouri courts had said, which said just because a slave moved to a free state didn't mean that that slave was suddenly free. Finally, the Chief Justice ruled that slaves were property under the Fifth Amendment. Any law that would deprive a slave owner of that property was unconstitutional. 2 justices did dissent. Benjamin Robbins Curtis criticized the Chief Justice for attacking the Missouri Compromise when that wasn't a part of the lawsuit. Once the suit was dismissed as lacking jurisdiction under the court, there was no reason to go any farther. The Chief Justice actually extended his views into this case where they did not belong. And Justice John McClain pointed out that men of African descent could be citizens because already in 5 states at that time, they had the right to vote. That Dred Scott decision was handed down on March 6th, 1857. And it wasn't but 3 years later we were embroiled in a civil war. So I have some concerns about these laws in Idaho and Alabama that are treating pregnant women seeking abortion like fugitive slaves. Is that going to lead to our next civil war? I shudder to think what happens as the lawsuits in these cases wind their way up to the Supreme Court, the 6-3 corrupt Supreme Court that has been put together specifically for the purpose of ending abortion rights in the United States of America. The good news is that on this issue, Republicans may be the dog that finally caught the car they were chasing. Just take a look at the polls lately of Americans and whether they consider themselves pro-choice or pro-life. During President Barack Obama's last term, only about 48% of the United States considered themselves pro-choice, not a clear majority. And during the term of the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted, 1,000 times sued, and civilly liable, mobbed-up criminal con man, racist, rapist, compulsively lying, oath-betraying Putin puppet, that only raised to about 49%. But following this corrupt Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, we have seen the support for pro-choice in this country skyrocket to 58%, and those that support forced birth slavery are down to just 39%. Trying to prosecute someone under a conspiracy law or an abortion trafficking law for providing information, transportation, or money to a woman who is seeking an abortion is as incredibly unconstitutional an act as I can think of. It'd be like trying to prosecute someone in the state of Idaho for making plans to travel to Oregon to buy and smoke some marijuana. Or it'd be like someone in the state of Kansas trying to prosecute someone for making plans to travel to Las Vegas and gamble, or to travel to a rural county in Nevada and engage in some prostitution. If federalism means anything, it means that every state gets to set its own laws in ways that are consistent with the Constitution. And we all have a constitutional First Amendment right to speak about abortion, to explain what abortion is, to tell people how they can go and get abortions. And as we've seen in cases involving political speech, money is speech. If they can rule under Citizens United that these super PACs can bundle up millions of dollars and use those as speech to get candidates elected, why can't we bundle together money and use that as speech to help women get abortions? I really hope that we can rectify this situation and that we can get abortion rights protected in this country through law. Maybe if Joe Biden gets reelected, maybe if he gets a large enough lead in the Senate and the House, they'll finally get around to codifying abortion rights into law. Until then, we're going to have many more of these abortion Dred Scott type of cases percolating their way through the federal courts and making their way to the Supreme Court. Let's hope we don't get another Dred Scott type decision that leads us into another civil war. I'm Radical Russ, and that's the Rant.